The doll was the last thing I inherited from my grandmother, a strange, reclusive woman who always had an air of mystery about her. Growing up, I'd only seen her once or twice a year, and each time I visited, I couldn't help but notice the doll. It sat in a glass case in the corner of her parlor, always pristine, with glassy eyes that seemed to follow you everywhere. My grandmother had called it Maria and never let anyone touch it. After she passed, I was surprised to find out that she'd left the doll to me in her will. My mother didn't seem surprised. She muttered something about passing on the responsibility and insisted I take it as soon as possible, as if the doll had to leave her house immediately. When I brought Maria back to my apartment, I wasn't sure what to do with her. She was beautiful in a disturbing way, with her porcelain skin, dark curls, and those unsettling glass eyes. I put her on a shelf in the corner, facing away from my bed. The last thing I needed was for those eyes to be on me while I slept. The first night, I woke up at around 3 in the morning. There was no sound, no reason, but I felt a strange, tense energy in the air, as if someone was in the room with me. I glanced around, heart racing, and my eyes fell on Maria. In the shadows, she seemed different. Her eyes looked sharper, her face somehow less serene. It was just my imagination, I told myself, and rolled over to go back to sleep. But when I closed my eyes, I felt the weight of her gaze on me, piercing through the dark. The following nights were worse. Each time I woke, I'd see her in different positions. Her head turned slightly toward me, her arms shifted. Once, she even seemed closer, though I knew I hadn't moved her. I blamed the stress of work, the grief of losing my grandmother, and the unsettling presence of the doll. But each night I grew more afraid. Then, one night, I heard it. A faint whisper, soft and slow, almost like a child's voice. "Don't leave me?" I jolted upright, my heart pounding. I stared at Maria, frozen in place, my mind reeling. Had that really come from her? I tried to calm myself, but the dread wouldn't leave. I picked up the doll, her porcelain skin cold and oddly heavy in my hands, and stuffed her in the closet, wrapping her in a thick blanket to muffle any sounds. I barely slept that night. Every creak of the floor, every rustle of the wind outside felt amplified, and I lay awake until dawn. When morning finally came, I told myself it was all in my head. Dolls didn't talk. I was tired, stressed, and needed sleep. I almost convinced myself it had been a dream. But that night, the whisper came again. "Don't leave me?" This time, it was unmistakable. I threw off my blankets, opened the closet, and yanked the blanket away from Maria, staring down at her cold face, those lifeless eyes. "Stop it," I shouted, my voice shaking. "You're just a doll." The room fell silent, but the air felt heavy, almost angry. I threw her back into the closet and slammed the door. I wasn't going to be intimidated by a doll, no matter how creepy it seemed. But then things began happening around the apartment. Doors that I knew I'd closed were found open. Lights would flicker, even though I just changed the bulbs. Objects went missing, only to reappear in strange places. I once found my keys next to Maria, her tiny porcelain hand resting on them as though she'd been holding them for me. My friends noticed my exhaustion and strange behavior. I tried to tell them, but they laughed it off, saying I was overreacting to an old doll. Frustrated and desperate for sleep, I decided to get rid of her once and for all. I wrapped her tightly, put her in a box, and drove to the nearest pawn shop. The clerk looked uneasy as I placed the doll on the counter. "Are you sure you want to sell this?" he asked, eyeing her warily. "Absolutely," I replied, barely holding back my relief. He hesitated, then shrugged. "All right, but if you change your mind, we're not responsible." I left the shop feeling a weight lift off my shoulders. I finally felt free. But that night, as I settled into bed, a familiar sinking feeling crept over me. I rolled over, glancing around my dim room, half expecting to see her. But I'd left her at the shop. She was gone. I tried to tell myself that, but the unease stayed with me, growing worse as the night stretched on. Then, in the silence, I heard it, a faint whisper, close to my ear. "Why did you leave me?" My body went rigid. I turned on the light, hard hammering, and scanned the room. There, on the floor by the closet, was Maria, her glassy eyes fixed on me, her porcelain lips twisted into a small, almost mocking smile. I let out a scream, backing against the wall, too terrified to even breathe. But she didn't move. She just sat there, her face frozen in that knowing, horrible smile. I was paralyzed, trapped in her gaze until the first light of dawn crept through the window. I grabbed her and ran outside, barely noticing the strange looks I got from neighbors as I ran to the nearby river. I hurled her as far as I could, watching her tiny body splash and disappear beneath the murky water. I stood there, panting, until I was sure she was gone, swallowed by the depths. For the first time in weeks, I slept soundly that night, thinking I was finally free. But in the morning, I awoke to find my apartment filled with the scent of old roses, my grandmother's favorite flower. I froze, a chill creeping over me, and turned to find a single wet footprint on my floor, small, almost childlike, leading from the front door to the corner of my bedroom. And there, sitting on the chair by my bed, was Maria, her face twisted in a furious scowl, her once pristine curls wet and tangled. "Don't leave me," she whispered again, her voice barely a breath but full of unmistakable rage. I knew then that she was part of me now, bound by something deeper, something I didn't understand. No matter what I did, no matter how far I ran, she would always find me. There was no escaping her. That was weeks ago, and every night since, she has come closer. Sometimes I find her next to my bed, sometimes on my pillow, her glassy eyes mere inches from mine when I wake. I don't bother trying to move her anymore. I don't scream. I've given up trying to escape. I know that one day soon, I'll wake to find her on my chest, her tiny hands wrapped around my throat. And in that final moment, as the last breath leaves my body, I know what I'll hear. "Don't leave me.